The metal hull of the research vessel screamed as it cut through the atmosphere of Krell Prime. Commander Ji-Won gripped the armrest of her seat so hard her knuckles turned white. Alarms blared all around her, and red warning lights painted everything in the color of danger. The ship was going down. There was no way to stop it. "All systems failing!" shouted Officer Dae-jung from the communications station, his voice shaking. "We have maybe 2 minutes before impact." Ji-Won's mind worked fast. She had trained for emergencies, but this was different. This was real. This was death coming toward them at tremendous speed. She looked out the window and saw the surface of Krell Prime rushing up to meet them. The moon was dark and rocky, with strange purple plants growing in twisted shapes. Nothing about it looked safe. "Brace for impact," Ji-Won commanded, her voice steady even though her heart was racing. The ship hit the ground hard. The sound was deafening. Metal twisted and bent. The impact threw Ji-Won forward, and her head struck something hard. Pain exploded behind her eyes. She felt ribs crack as the armrest pressed into her body during the terrible collision. Around her, equipment fell from walls. Sparks flew from broken circuits. Then, suddenly, everything stopped moving. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. Ji-Won lay on her side on the floor, which was now tilted at an impossible angle. She could feel warm blood running down her face. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps because her ribs hurt with every breath. She tried to move, but her body did not want to obey. Through the broken window, she could see the dark sky of Krell Prime turning into daylight. Soon the sun would rise on this strange world, and she would have to figure out how to survive. Using her arms, she pulled herself toward the emergency exit. Every movement sent pain through her injured body, but she forced herself to keep going. Officer Dae-jung lay near the navigation station, not moving. Ji-Won did not look too closely. She did not want to know if he was dead or simply unconscious. That thought would only slow her down. She reached the emergency exit and pushed the manual button. Nothing happened. She hit it again, harder. Still nothing. The power must have died completely in the crash. She searched for something heavy, found a broken piece of metal chair, and used it to break the window. Sharp pieces of glass and metal fell to the ground below. Ji-Won was bleeding from several new cuts, but she did not care. Survival was all that mattered now. She climbed out through the broken window and dropped to the ground. The moment her feet touched the soil of Krell Prime, she collapsed. Her body simply could not hold her up anymore. She lay on her back, looking up at the sky, breathing hard and waiting for either rescue or death. Time passed in a strange way. Ji-Won drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she was hot, sometimes she was cold. Sometimes she heard sounds that might have been animals, and sometimes she heard nothing but the wind. Her wounds were getting worse. The crack in her ribs was definitely serious. She could feel blood inside her body, moving to places it should not go. She wondered how long she had left. Then she heard something different. Heavy footsteps. Not the light sound of human boots, but something much bigger and heavier. Whatever was approaching, it was large. Ji-Won's eyes opened, and she saw enormous shapes coming toward her through the purple plants. Krells. She recognized them from the briefing files she had studied before coming to this moon. These creatures were predators, apex hunters of Krell Prime. They had massive bodies covered in dark scales, claws like curved swords, and teeth that looked designed to tear flesh. They were the things that kept this moon dangerous for human exploration. Ji-Won waited for them to kill her. She was too weak to run, too injured to fight. Death was coming now, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But then something strange happened. The 4 Krells that approached were smaller than she expected. Looking at the briefing files again in her memory, she realized these were young ones. Cubs, probably, not fully grown. They stopped a short distance from her and made low rumbling sounds at each other. They did not seem angry. They seemed curious. One of the cubs, smaller than the others with a slightly different color to its scales, stepped closer to Ji-won. She could have fit 5 of herself inside its mouth, she thought. But the cub did not attack. Instead, it lowered its massive head and sniffed at her, the way an animal might investigate something unknown. Ji-won's breath came in short gasps. Every moment she expected pain, expected those claws to tear into her, expected the end. But it did not come. The small cub made a gentle rumbling sound and touched one of its claws very carefully to the blood on her arm. It seemed to notice the red liquid with great interest. The cub turned back to the others and made more rumbling sounds. The largest of the cubs seemed to argue about something, but Ji-won could see that the smallest cub was the one controlling the conversation, pushing the others to do something. Finally, all 4 cubs seemed to agree on a plan. They did not harm Ji-won. Instead, they did something surprising. They gathered around her, their massive bodies forming a protective circle. They seemed to be trying to keep her warm. The smallest cub left and returned minutes later carrying strange plants in its mouth. These plants were thick and green, and they smelled like nothing Ji-won had ever encountered. The cube seemed to be trying to use them on her wounds, carefully placing them against her cuts and bruises. The process was clumsy and probably not very helpful, but it was clear that the cub was trying to help. It was trying to heal her. This should have been impossible. Everything Ji-won knew about Krells said they were killers, that they understood only hunger and violence. But here were 4 young Krells, doing their best to take care of a wounded human who should have been nothing but food to them. As the sun continued to rise over the dark landscape of Krell Prime, and the young Krells worked to help the injured human survive, something extraordinary began. A connection was forming between 2 species that should never have understood each other. Ji-won's eyes closed, and she let herself rest for the first time since the crash. She was still in pain. She was still badly hurt, but she was alive, and somehow these strange and beautiful creatures were keeping her that way. The first day and night merged together in Ji-won's mind. She woke and slept many times, never sure which was which. Sometimes the small cub was beside her. Sometimes all 4 cubs were there. They were learning her in their own way. They watched how she moved, how she responded to different things, how her human body worked. The smallest cub became her main caretaker, even though it was the weakest of the group. Ji-won started to think of it as the leader, the one making decisions for the others. This cub had a lighter color to its scales, almost gray instead of the deep black of the others. There was something about its eyes that seemed kinder, more curious, more willing to understand new things. By the second day, Ji-won was able to sit up a little. Her ribs still screamed in pain when she moved, and blood still ran from several of her wounds. But she was alive. That alone was a miracle. The cubs continued their efforts to help her. They brought her different things to eat, trying to figure out what her body needed. They brought meat first, which Ji-won had to refuse in the gentlest way possible. She did not want to offend the creatures who were trying to save her. Then they brought something else, a plant with thick leaves that held water inside. Ji-won managed to drink a little, and the liquid inside was cool and clean. She nodded to show she liked it, and the gray cub made a pleased rumbling sound. Then it went away and came back with more. The other cubs seemed to understand now. They began bringing her these water plants regularly, checking on her the way a human might check on a sick friend. The gray cub stayed closest to her. Ji-won realized it probably spent every night beside her, protecting her. From what? She was not sure. But there was a constant alertness in the cub's posture, a readiness to defend against anything that might threaten the strange, wounded creature it had decided to care for. On the second night, Ji-won tried to communicate. She used sounds and simple words, mixing them with Krell rumbles she had heard in her training. "Help," she said clearly in the human language. Then she tried to make the same sound in Krell, a low rumble in her throat that came out weak and strange. The gray cub perked up its massive head. It made an excited noise and called to the others. They all gathered around Ji-Wan, waiting. She pointed to herself. "Ji-Wan," she said. It was her name, her identity, her first attempt at real communication. The gray cub tried to repeat it. It came out as a series of rough growls, nothing like her actual name. But the intention was clear. It was trying. All the other cubs tried too, each one making different rumbling sounds, trying to copy something that was clearly very difficult for their predator mouths to say. Then the gray cub pointed to itself with one claw. It made a sound, a specific combination of rumbles and clicks. The other cubs confirmed it was correct by making the same sound. Ji-Wan tried to repeat the name, and like the cub trying to say Ji-Wan, she failed completely. But the cub seemed happy that she had tried. It made a pleased sound and touched her shoulder gently with the tip of one claw. Over the next hours, they played a game of teaching each other words. Ji-Wan taught them water and rest. She taught them help, a word that seemed important since they were already doing it without understanding the human language for it. The gray cub was the best student. It watched her mouth move when she spoke. It paid attention to her hand gestures. It understood that she was trying to tell it things, and it was determined to understand. The cubs also seemed to understand that Ji-Wan was fragile in a way they were not. When they moved around her, they were careful. When they touched her, their massive claws retracted so only the soft pads of their feet and hands made contact. The gray cub, especially, moved with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a large creature. On the third day, Ji-Wan was strong enough to sit against a rock and watch the landscape around them. She could see the crash site of her ship in the distance, a broken, twisted metal skeleton that would never fly again. She wondered if anyone else had survived. She wondered if the ship in orbit had noticed her crash. She wondered if she would ever see another human again. But even as those thoughts came, she found she was not as afraid as she should have been. The four cubs created a protective circle around her, even during the day. They took turns sleeping, always keeping watch. Ji-Wan realized that if danger came, these creatures would defend her, not because she was human, not because she was valuable, but because they had decided she was worth protecting. One of the larger cubs brought back fresh meat and placed it in front of her. When Ji-Wan shook her head, it did not seem offended. Instead, it took the meat and ate it itself, like it was no big deal that she did not want any. The gray cub brought back a different plant, one that was sweet and easy to eat. Ji-Wan smiled and nodded. The cub seemed to understand that the smile meant she was happy. Ji-Wan was beginning to realize something important. These cubs were not attacking her, not hunting her, because they were different from the adult Krells. Somewhere in their training, in their nature, in their development, something had made them curious instead of cruel. Something had made them gentle instead of vicious. They were outcasts. She could see it in the way they stayed away from the main territory, in the way the gray cub seemed to want to protect the others, even though it was smallest. In the way they all seemed to accept that they were not wanted by the main pride. And Ji-Wan, a human woman alone on a hostile alien moon, was just like them. She did not belong here. She was not wanted by this world. She was small and weak and strange. But these four young predators had looked at her and seen not food, not threat, but something they understood. Another creature that did not fit in. Another creature that needed protection. As the third day turned to night, Ji-Wan rested her hand on the warm scales of the gray cub, and for the first time since the crash, she felt something like peace. She did not know how long this would last. She did not know what would happen when the main pride discovered them. But for now, in this moment, she was not alone, and neither were they. The peace did not last as long as Ji-won had hoped. On the morning of the fourth day, the gray cub suddenly became alert. Its entire body went rigid, and it made a sharp warning sound that was completely different from any noise it had made before. The other three cubs responded immediately, standing up and turning toward the direction of the distant mountains. Ji-won felt her stomach drop. She knew that sound. She had heard it in the briefing videos about Krells. It was a danger sound. It was a warning. Something was coming and the cubs were afraid. The gray cub ran a quick circle around their small camp, checking everything, making sure the water plants were hidden behind rocks, making sure there were no signs of human presence in their territory. Then it returned to Ji-won and made soft, rumbling sounds as if trying to calm her. But the cub was not calm itself. Ji-won could see the fear in its eyes. "What is it?" Ji-won asked in simple words, even though she knew the cub could not understand. But speaking helped her feel less afraid. One of the larger cubs made a sound back toward the mountains, a sound that seemed to be both a question and a challenge. Another cub touched it with a claw, as if warning it not to be so loud. The tension in their small group grew tighter and tighter as the day went on. They could not move. Ji-won's injuries were still too serious. She could not walk far, and the cubs would not leave her alone. So they stayed in their hidden place among the rocks and the twisted purple plants. And they waited. As the sun moved across the sky, the sounds from the mountains grew louder. Deep roars that shook the ground. Heavy footsteps that made the earth tremble. The cubs pressed closer to Ji-won, their protective circle tightening. The gray cub stayed right beside her head, its breathing fast and nervous. "It is okay," Ji-won whispered to it, even though nothing was okay. "It is okay." She repeated the words like a prayer, like a spell that might keep danger away. But it would not keep danger away. She knew that. The sounds were getting closer, and they were enormous. Whatever was coming, it was large and strong and angry. These young cubs were no match for whatever was hunting them. Ji-won looked at the gray cub and understood something in that moment. These cubs would die trying to protect her. They would stand in front of her and fight, even though they could not win. They would die because they had decided she was worth dying for. The thought broke something inside her. Tears began to run down her face, mixing with blood and dirt. She had caused this. She had crashed on their moon. She had been found by them. She had allowed them to care for her, to bond with her. Now they would die for it. The gray cub noticed her tears and made a soft, mournful sound. It lowered its head and rested it against her chest, right over her heart. The other cubs did the same, all of them pressing against her, all of them offering comfort to the creature they were about to die defending. As the sounds from the mountains grew to a roar so loud that Ji-won had to close her eyes against it, the cubs arranged themselves in a new formation. They stood between Ji-won and the direction of the noise. They stood as a barrier. They stood as warriors, even though they were young and afraid. Ji-won reached out and held the gray cub's claw, which had extended to grip her hand back. This was how it would end. Not with rescue, not with escape, but with 4 young Krells dying while trying to save one human. It was not fair. It was not right. But it was what was going to happen. The ground shook harder. The purple plants bent and broke under the weight of whatever was coming. Ji-won could hear the heavy breathing of the approaching creatures, could hear the scrape of their claws against stone. The cubs made their warning sounds, low and steady, trying to tell the approaching creatures to stay away. Nothing could stop what was coming now. The light changed as enormous shadows fell across the rocky ground, where Ji-won and the cubs had made their home. The roars became louder, so loud that Ji-won wanted to cover her ears. But she kept holding the gray cub's claw instead. She wanted the last thing the cub felt to know that it had not been alone, that it had been understood, that its choice to protect her had meant something. Time seemed to stop. The world held its breath. The cubs stood rigid, ready to fight, ready to die, and Ji-won, small and fragile and human, held the claw of the creature that loved her without knowing why, and she waited for the end. But the end did not come immediately. There was a moment of silence, a moment where the massive shadows paused, a moment where something unexpected was about to happen. The cubs sensed it. Their fear seemed to shift into something else. Not hope exactly, but a strange kind of waiting. A moment where the future was not yet written, where anything could happen next. And in that moment of uncertainty and danger and fear and courage, everything balanced on the edge of a blade, waiting to fall one way or another. The elite guard of Krell Prime emerged from the darkness and twisted plants like shadows made solid. They were enormous, each one 3 times the size of the cubs, with scars covering their dark scales and claws that had seen countless battles. Their leader was General Krath, the most feared warrior on the entire moon. One of his eyes was clouded from an old wound, and his jaw was marked with the symbols of his rank, cuts and patterns made during his rise to power. Krath had killed everything he had ever hunted. He had never shown mercy. He had never hesitated. He was the perfect Krell warrior, a creature of pure predatory instinct and calculated violence. When he saw the cubs standing in a protective circle around something small and strange, he did not need to think about what came next. He simply acted. His claw came up, ready to strike. The cubs did not move. They stood their ground, trembling with fear but refusing to run, refusing to abandon what they were protecting. This was not the behavior of wild animals. This was something else, something that should not exist among Krells. Krath's claw stopped an inch from striking. All around him, the other elite guard warriors froze in place. They were confused. This was not the usual way of things. Prey ran, or they fought back, or they died. They did not stand together in protection. They especially did not stand in protection of something so small and fragile and alien. In that frozen moment, Ji-won looked up at General Krath. Blood and dirt covered her face. Her body was wrapped in bandages made from plants, bandages that the cubs had carefully placed on her wounds. Her eyes were wet with tears, but her gaze was steady. She was looking at the most dangerous creature on Krell Prime, and she was not looking away. Krath's clouded eye focused on her. He saw a human woman, small as a cub, but still young, still struggling against death, still refusing to surrender. He saw her hand holding the gray cub's claw. He saw the way the cub leaned against her, protective and fierce and loyal. He saw something in that moment that he had not seen in many years. He saw weakness protecting weakness. It made no sense. In the way of Krells, the strong survived. The weak were eliminated. This was the natural order. Sentiment was a luxury only peaceful species could afford. Krells were warriors. They did not form bonds across species lines. They did not care for creatures they could hunt and eat. But the cubs were not moving. The human was not crying out. They were standing together, waiting for death, but not breaking, not abandoning each other. Krath's claw lowered. The other elite guard warriors made sounds of confusion. Some of them looked to Krath for orders. What was happening? Why had their general stopped? What came next? Krath did not answer them. Instead, he walked closer to Ji-won and the cubs. His footsteps shook the ground with each step. He was so much larger than the cubs, so much more powerful. If he wanted, he could kill them all with a single move. He lowered his massive head to look at Ji-won more closely. The human did not look away. She held the gray cub's claw tighter. But she did not hide, did not whimper, did not beg for mercy. "Speak, human," Krath commanded in the human language, which he had learned in his many years of war and hunting. "Explain what has happened here. Why do these cubs protect you?" Jiwan's throat was dry, her voice weak from days of pain and injury, but she forced the words out. "They found me broken. They healed me. I am not enemy. I am companion." The word companion seemed strange in her mouth, but it was true. That was what the cubs had become to her. That was what she had become to them. "You speak our language," Krath said. It was not a question. "A little," Jiwan replied. She was still terrified. Death could come at any moment, but she had made a choice not to cower, not to beg, not to fall apart. She had made a choice to stand with these creatures who had chosen to stand with her. Krath made a low rumbling sound. The other elite guard warriors waited, muscles tense, ready to attack the moment their leader gave the order. But the order did not come. Instead, Krath did something that shocked every warrior standing in that place. He laughed. It was a deep, rumbling laugh that shook the earth and echoed off the Rocky Mountains. It was the sound of a warrior finding something genuinely funny in a world where humor was rare. The other guards looked at each other in confusion. They had never heard their leader laugh before. They did not think it was possible. "You tell me, small human, that these cubs are not outcasts," Krath said, still laughing. "You tell me that they are better than all of us. You, a creature we could crush like an insect, with a body as fragile as glass, you stand here and make demands of the elite guard of Krell Prime." Jiwan's heart was racing. She had made a terrible mistake. She had insulted the most powerful warrior on the moon, and now she would die for it. But then Krath spoke again, and his voice had changed. It was not angry. It was thoughtful. "And you are right," he said. "You are absolutely right. A species capable of such logicless compassion, weak as you are, represents a strength we have lost, a strength we forgot we needed." He turned to his warriors and gave them orders. "Bring the human to the medical chambers, the cubs as well. Treat the human's wounds with everything we have. I want reports on her condition every hour. And any warrior who harms these cubs will answer to me personally." The elite guard warriors moved immediately, following their general's orders. Some of them carefully approached Jiwan and the cubs, trying to understand what was happening. The gray cub made a nervous sound, but Jiwan whispered to it, telling it they were safe now, that Krath was protecting them instead of trying to kill them. As Jiwan was gently lifted onto the broad back of one of the warriors, she looked back at the gray cub. Their eyes met, and in that moment they both understood that everything had changed. The world they knew was about to be very different, and neither of them knew if that difference would be good or bad, but they would face it together. The medical chambers of the Krell Pride were vast and cold, carved deep into the rock beneath their main settlement. Jiwan lay on a stone platform while Krell physicians worked on her injuries. Their methods were harsh and direct, but effective. They used knowledge gained from thousands of years of treating wounded warriors. Still, Jiwan could not help but flinch as they cleaned her wounds and bound them with materials she did not recognize. The gray cub stayed as close as possible, kept back only by Krath's personal guard, who had orders not to let the cubs interfere with the medical treatment. But the cub watched everything, ready to defend Jiwan if the doctors tried to hurt her. The other 3 cubs waited in an adjoining chamber, resting on stone beds that had been prepared for them. The days passed, and Jiwan's body began to heal. The Krell medicine was better than anything humans had, made from plants and minerals of this world that worked in ways she could not explain. Her ribs still ached, but she could breathe more deeply. Her wounds were closing. The blood inside her body was being absorbed and healed. She was becoming stronger every day. During this time, Krath visited her regularly. He would sit near her stone bed, his massive form making even the large medical chamber feel small, and he would talk to her about his world, about the Krells, about the Pride. "We are not always like this," he told her one day. "Once, many generations ago, we were like you described the cubs. We were curious. We formed bonds not just with our own pride, but with others. We traveled and learned, but over time, we became hard. We forgot that strength comes in many forms." Jiwan listened carefully, trying to understand. "Why did you change?" she asked. "Survival," Krath said. "War with other prides, competition for food and territory. We had to become stronger, faster, more willing to kill. Slowly, the gentle ones died or left. The cruel ones remained. We became pure predators, and we forgot that intelligence and compassion could be weapons too." Jiwan thought about this. "But you remembered today, when you saw the cubs protecting me." Krath nodded slowly. "I saw something in their actions that reminded me of what we once were. A strength that does not come from claws or teeth. A strength that comes from choice. They chose to protect you. No instinct told them to do this. No hunger drove them. They simply chose it because something in them understood that you mattered." By the 7th day of her recovery, Jiwan was strong enough to stand. She walked slowly through the medical chambers, supported by the gray cub on one side. The other 3 cubs followed, still protective, still watching for danger. Krath watched her progress with what might have been approval. "You are ready for the council," he told her. "The elders wish to speak with you. They wish to understand what you are, what your people want, and whether we should consider what I have decided." "What have you decided?" Jiwan asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "An alliance," Krath said simply. "Your species and mine. Your people up there in the orbit above our world, waiting to hear if you are alive, they will come down. We will meet them. And we will begin something new. Something that has not existed before." The council chamber was impressive. It was a vast space carved from the heart of the stone, with a ceiling so high that it disappeared into darkness. The elders of the Krell Pride sat in a circle, 12 ancient warriors with scars and symbols of rank covering their bodies. They looked at Jiwan with expressions that could have meant anything. One of the elders, older than Krath by many years, stood and approached her. "You are the creature that convinced our general to spare the outcast cubs?" it asked. "No," Jiwan replied honestly. "The cubs convinced him. They protected me. General Krath simply recognized their strength." The old elder made a deep rumbling sound that might have been respect. "Yes. He has explained this to us. You possess a quality that we have lost. You form bonds across difference. Your species bonds with ours, even knowing we could destroy you. This is either great wisdom or great foolishness." "Maybe both," Jiwan said. She was thinking of the gray cub, of the way it had stood between her and death, of the way it still stayed close to her even now that she was safer. "The council votes," the old elder announced. "General Krath proposes an alliance with humanity. Let those who support this say so." One by one, the elders made sounds of agreement. Some were faster than others, some seemed reluctant, but they all voted for the alliance. Only one elder sat silent, not voting, which made the decision almost unanimous. "It is decided," the old elder said. "We will open our world to humans. We will establish trade and mutual defense. And these cubs," the elder gestured to the 4 young Krells surrounding Jiwan, "will be recognized as heroes of this new age. They will be known as the bridges, the ones who first connected our species." Jiwan felt tears beginning to form again, but this time they were tears of relief, tears of joy. The gray cub made a proud sound, finally releasing some of the tension it had been carrying for days. The other cubs celebrated in their own way, making pleased rumbling sounds that echoed through the council chamber. Krath approached Jiwan and lowered his massive head. Your people, he said. We must contact them. They must come down and meet with us. The old way of fear and distance is ending. A new way begins now. Jiwan nodded. She reached up and touched Krath's scarred face with her small human hand. Thank you for understanding, she said. Thank you for seeing that compassion is not weakness. You helped me remember, Krath replied. You and these cubs showed me something I had forgotten, that there is strength in protecting others simply because you choose to, that there is power in bonds formed not from instinct, but from will and understanding. As Jiwan was led to the communication chamber to contact her ship, the gray cub walked beside her, finally walking freely without fear of harm. The other cubs followed, no longer hidden, no longer ashamed of what they were. They were bridges now. They were heroes of a new story being written by two species learning to understand each other.